You know, in this battle for the soul of America, democracy prevailed. We, the people, voted. Faith in our institutions held. In America, politicians don't take power. People grant power to them. The flame of democracy was lit in this nation a long time ago. And we now know nothing, not even a pandemic or an abuse of power, can extinguish that flame. The court sent a clear signal to President Trump.
Well, that is a clip of Joe Biden in the wake of the Electoral College vote that gives him formally the title of President-elect. It looks like Donald Trump's last-ditch legal efforts have failed. There still is an obscure path to victory for Trump, but I think we have to acknowledge that it is most unlikely. However, in his moment of victory, Joe Biden was bitter, negative, continuing the attack instead of uniting America, poking at those who didn't support him. It was an incredible speech, punctuated by bursts of coughing. Here's a quick glimpse of that.
And once again, in America, the rule of law, more Americans voted this year than have ever voted in the history of the United States. Votes counted. President Pence received when they won in 2016. Excuse me. Or dispute the results margin 4 years ago. And yet, I thank them. And I'm convinced we can work together for the good of the nation on many subjects. That's the duty owed to the people, to our Constitution, to our history.
Well, what do you make of this speech? And will Joe Biden even make it to inauguration? Joining us now via Skype from the Los Angeles area is our friend Joel Pollak, senior editor-at-large of Breitbart.com and the author of the new ebook, Neither Fair Nor Free. Is that the title of your new ebook, Joel?
Neither Free Nor Fair, the 2020 U.S. presidential election. And yes, it's about how our election was distorted by the Democrats, by the media, by various other institutions to make it very difficult for Donald Trump to win. If you zoom out from the question of voter fraud, which people are still very concerned about, and you look at the election as a whole, this was not an election conducted by what would be standard democratic standards or standard international practice. This was skewed against the president, and it's actually as remarkable that he did as well as he did.
Yeah. As you point out, this unfairness and this unfreeness was not done in the main illegally. That's the crazy thing, is it was approved by courts, usually litigated, not legislated. So the big steal didn't happen with, extra ballots being sneaked in the dead of night. It happened months earlier with the vote harvesting. But let's talk about, we had a great interview with you about your book before. I'm sorry, last moment I thought, Oh my God, this is your expertise. This is your turf. But last night, Biden gave a speech and, do a victory lap or the opposite. Be magnanimous. I mean, you finally won. I think it's fair. 99.9% chance. Let me put it this way. A lot of those British betting houses that let people bet on political outcomes, they refused to pay out until yesterday, where I think one of the big ones paid out over €1 billion. So that's how certain they are. Let me put it that way. Instead of saying, all right, I won, I got everything I ever wanted, let me actually be magnanimous for an hour, Biden couldn't do it, could he?
No, and I think he ought to reach out to Trump and his supporters. He actually has the unique opportunity and ability to do so because he's now the president-elect. So he has what he wanted, and he can bring the country together if he reaches out, if he talks about the things that Trump contributed to the country, if he thanks Trump for Operation Warp Speed. Biden's pretending this vaccination plan is now his own. He's out there promising to vaccinate 100 million people by March. Well, that's what Trump's already doing. So if he acknowledged that Trump had a positive effect on the country, even if his own supporters don't believe it, even if Biden supporters would be upset, if he said to Trump and his supporters, thanks for your service, thanks for what you did, let's move ahead together, I think that would be incredible, actually. And he has the opportunity to do it. President Trump reached out when he won in his victory speech. He reached out to those who didn't vote for him and so forth, and was simply met by conspiracy theories and resistance and hostility. I think when you are the winner of the election, it's in your best interest to be magnanimous. But instead, Biden continued arguing the case that he had already won. Biden continued arguing why these challenges by the Trump campaign had fallen short. And he seemed irritated that they had even been brought, rather than saying the other side had its rights, the other side had its day in court, the other side challenged these results, and we respect their right to do so. No, he basically expressed irritation. This is a guy who couldn't admit that Trump was a legitimate president. I mean, as recently as last May, he was agreeing with Democratic voters who said that Trump was illegitimate and was placed in office by Russia. So Biden and the Democrats refused to accept Trump's election as legitimate for years. And yet Biden is somehow annoyed that Trump is going through the legal system and exhausting every option he has. I mean, that's what Democrats would do in the same position. So the idea that what Trump is doing is somehow illegitimate. The other thing Biden did was he condemned intimidation and threats and so forth against poll workers, election officials. And he was right to do so. But he didn't condemn the physical attacks on Trump supporters that have happened since the election. He didn't condemn the intimidation against Trump's lawyers. With Biden, condemnation of violence is almost always entirely in one direction. And he pretends that the violence is a right-wing problem. It is overwhelmingly 99% a left-wing problem in this country. And by ignoring that, he's effectively condoning it. He's not going to stop the left from doing violent things. He's not going to stop the left from intimidating lawyers and destroying that aspect of our judicial system, that everyone has the right to representation, that everyone has a right to a defense, or just to make their case in court. And I think Biden burned bridges with that speech. He could have reached out, and instead he is proving himself to be the servant of a party that is bent on vengeance, not on reconciliation. The only Republicans Biden is interested in talking to are those who don't like Trump. That's not who you have to negotiate with. The people you have to reconcile with are the 75 million people who supported Donald Trump and Donald Trump himself. And Biden's never really reached out personally. He continues to treat Trump like some kind of usurper, like some kind of dilettante interloper who never got elected properly in the first place. That's not going to fly. And if Biden does that, the country's going to remain divided for years into the future. This is an opportunity for him to lead by telling Trump that his service is appreciated, by giving Trump, in a sense, a dignified exit, and also by telling Democrats stop pursuing Trump with these fruitless investigations. You know, they're promising investigations ad infinitum of Trump and his family. For what? We don't know. They're just going to find something. They're going to just investigate. That's corrosive to our democracy. They talk about a peaceful transfer of power, but when you're threatening the other party with continued investigations forever for no reason, that's not a peaceful transfer of power. So Biden has an opportunity and really a responsibility, I would argue, to lead, but he's not doing it. He's choosing the route of division, and I think that's going to have some very serious consequences.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.